Ellen's studio was buzzing. The lights hit just right, the crowd was already warmed up, and the cameras were rolling. Today's guest? Senator John Kennedy. Not the man of glitz, glamour, or late-night banter, but he had accepted the invite. She wanted a sharp exchange, a touch of wit, a viral moment. And Kennedy? He came for something entirely different. He sat down in his usual stoic style, a half-smirk carved into his weathered face. Ellen leaned forward, her smile wide, tone playful. "So, Senator Kennedy, did you come all the way from Washington just to frown at my audience?" Polite laughter filled the room. Kennedy didn't blink. "No, ma'am. I came to answer real questions, if you've got any." The temperature dropped a few degrees. The band stopped laughing. Ellen chuckled nervously, tilting her head. "Well, you've got to admit, we're not on the Senate floor here. Lighten up." Kennedy adjusted his tie. "If the truth makes people uncomfortable, maybe it's time to stop selling comedy and start buying honesty." Silence. The tension, thick and unexpected, sparked a shift. What was meant to be a breezy interview now carried the weight of something much heavier. Ellen glanced at the camera, momentarily unsure whether to double down or switch gears. But Kennedy? He was just getting started. Ellen adjusted her posture, reaching for her signature charm. "All right, Senator. You're known for being direct. But let's take it easy, this is a safe space. We don't grill people here, we get to know them." Kennedy leaned in slightly, voice low but firm. "That's the problem, Ellen. Too many people have gotten comfortable with questions that don't matter. What's the point of getting to know someone if you're afraid to know what they actually believe?" Her grin stiffened. She had built her brand on warmth, empathy, and clever deflection. This wasn't the rhythm she was used to. "Senator, I don't think my audience tuned in for a lecture." Kennedy held her gaze. "And I didn't fly across the country to smile at softballs." The crowd stirred. Whispers fluttered through the rows of seats like wind before a storm. Ellen, now on her heels, took the offensive. "You've made headlines for your colorful phrasing. Don't you think you could be more inclusive, maybe a little less abrasive?" Kennedy let a slow breath out. "I don't aim to be abrasive. I aim to be clear. If clarity offends, maybe it's not my words that need fixing." A pause. Ellen tried to reclaim control with a joke, but Kennedy had shifted the gravity of the room. This wasn't entertainment anymore, it was confrontation. And he wasn't playing by her rules. The tension in the studio had fully settled now, not loud, not chaotic, but dense. Ellen crossed her legs and tried again, this time leaning on her audience. "You've got a way with words, Senator, I'll give you that," she said, turning to the crowd. "But we live in a world where words can heal, or hurt. Ever think about the impact you have when you speak?" Kennedy raised an eyebrow. "You mean the impact of telling the truth, even when it's unpopular?" "Because I think about it every time I open my mouth." The audience shifted, unsure whether to clap or stay silent. Ellen pressed, her tone sharpening. "You once said empathy is not a policy. I find that disturbing, frankly. Are you saying compassion doesn't belong in government?" He didn't flinch. "I'm saying government can't run on feelings. Empathy without boundaries leads to chaos. Law must guide compassion, not the other way around." The crowd buzzed again, torn between applause and unease. Ellen straightened, clearly frustrated now. "So, you believe the law should override humanity?" Kennedy leaned forward, his voice slow, deliberate. "No, Ellen. I believe humanity is strongest when it respects law. Otherwise, it's just sentiment dressed up as virtue." That line hit harder than either expected. The audience quieted, not out of disapproval, but in realization. This wasn't just a political disagreement anymore. This was a worldview clash. Ellen looked momentarily shaken, not because she had lost control of the interview, but because Kennedy had managed to pierce through her armor of humor and lightness with nothing but conviction. And for the first time in a long time, Ellen didn't know what to say next. Silence hung in the studio like smoke after a fire. Ellen finally broke it, her voice softer now. You talk about law like it's sacred. But law has failed people, Senator. It's failed women, people of color, the LGBTQ community, my community. What do you say to that? Kennedy didn't rush his answer. He looked down for a moment, then up, eyes clear. I say the law is a tool. And like any tool, it can be wielded for justice or for harm. I don't worship the law. I defend the idea that it must apply equally, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. Ellen blinked, visibly surprised at the nuance. But comfort matters too, she pushed back. People want to feel safe. Not just legally protected, but understood. Kennedy nodded. And that's where we differ, Ellen. I want people to be safe in their rights. You want them to feel safe in their feelings. That's not the same thing. The crowd absorbed every word, sensing a debate much larger than the two on stage. She shook her head, smiling sadly. You really believe feelings don't belong in leadership? I believe leaders who lead with feelings alone will sink the ship when the storms come. Feelings sway with the wind. Law is the anchor. For a brief moment, the set felt like a courtroom, not because of the lights or the cameras, but because every word now held weight. No punchlines, no applause lines. Just two people, staring across a divide that couldn't be filled with jokes or rhetoric. And for the first time, Ellen looked not defeated, but deeply curious. A pause stretched between them, heavy, but not hostile. Ellen leaned back, her fingers intertwined, gaze steady. You know, she said quietly, you remind me of my dad. Old school, proud, unyielding. And sometimes, just plain hard to reach. Kennedy allowed a thin smile. He sounds like someone worth respecting. He was, she said. But he never bent. Not even when he should have. Sometimes strength feels a lot like stubbornness, Senator. Kennedy looked her in the eye. And sometimes softness is just another name for surrender. That line hit the room like a gavel. The audience didn't cheer. They didn't boo. They simply listened. Because this wasn't performance anymore, it was exposure. Of two minds, two Americas, two versions of truth. Ellen stood, slowly walking across the set, as if trying to loosen the grip of the conversation. So, what happens now? She asked, half to herself. Do we just keep talking past each other forever? Kennedy remained seated. Not if we start listening for more than applause. That stopped her. She turned, arms crossed now, no smile on her face. Then listen, Senator. People are scared. They're tired. They want more than laws. They want leaders who make them feel seen. I don't want to be seen, he replied. I want to be understood, and held accountable. Same goes for every person in power. For once, Ellen had no quip. And in that moment, something rare happened, mutual recognition. Not agreement. Not reconciliation. But a brief, flickering understanding between two people standing on opposite ends of a fault line, both refusing to fall in. Ellen returned to her chair, her signature ease now completely gone. The stage lighting felt harsher, the space between them tighter. No laughter, no music, just two voices, tethered to two worldviews that refused to shake hands. Let me be honest with you, Senator, she said finally. I invite guests here because I believe in conversation. But right now, I feel like I'm sitting across from a man who thinks empathy is weakness. Kennedy didn't flinch. You mistake directness for coldness. Empathy's real, Ellen, but it's not policy. You can't legislate with feelings alone. Her eyes narrowed. No, but you can legislate with compassion. People are hurting out there. And what helps them more? He asked. A hug, or a job, a speech, or safety on their streets? The crowd was dead silent. Ellen leaned forward, voice now a whisper. You think everyone who disagrees with you is soft. But I think you're scared. Kennedy raised a brow. Scared of change. Scared of losing control. Scared of a world where your way isn't the only way. The pause that followed was thick, almost unbearable. Then Kennedy stood. Not angry, resolute. His voice was calm, firm, unshakable. I served in war. I've buried friends. I've made decisions that kept people alive, and sometimes, ones that didn't. You think I'm scared of opinions? I'm scared of silence. Of a country so obsessed with not offending that it forgets how to lead. Ellen stood too. You talk about leadership, but you just want obedience. No, he said. I want honesty. Even when it stings. And at that moment, with both standing, eyes locked, words spent, it wasn't about left or right. It was about two people who had peeled themselves bare in front of millions, daring the other not just to hear, but to actually understand. The applause never came. Instead, a stillness settled like fog, heavy, uncertain, and charged. Kennedy sat back down, fingers interlocked, eyes not on Ellen anymore, but on the audience. On America. Ellen, arms crossed, shifted her tone. You say silence is dangerous. But you speak so loudly, Senator, people stop listening. I'm not here for applause, Kennedy said. I'm here to say what I believe, even if it ruins the dinner conversation. She looked down for a moment, then asked quietly, do you believe people like me are what's wrong with the country? He paused. No, I believe people like you are what makes this country complicated. And that's not a bad thing. It's just not always right. That answer caught her off guard, the honesty of it, the refusal to demonize. For the first time, her sarcasm faded. You don't hate me? Kennedy shook his head. I hate shallow arguments. I hate moral high ground used like a weapon. But I don't hate you. The camera zoomed in, not for drama, but for truth. For the tension that wasn't explosive, but real. Two people with entirely different convictions, sitting not as enemies anymore, but reluctant reflections. The audience didn't cheer. They breathed. Ellen sighed, almost smiling. So what now? Kennedy's voice softened. Now, we stop pretending disagreement is danger. That if someone pushes back, they're a villain. And if they are, she asked, then we hold the line, he said. But we still look them in the eye when we do it. It was a strange kind of peace, not agreement, but respect shaped by fire. The moment didn't ask for resolution. It simply asked, can two Americans speak, clash, and still stay human? As the tension eased, the studio became something else, not a battleground, not a debate stage, but a confessional booth neither had expected. Ellen leaned back, quieter now. You know. I thought if I hit you hard enough with emotion, you'd crack. But you didn't. Kennedy smiled faintly. You thought I was stone. Turns out I'm just tired. She tilted her head. Of what? He didn't hesitate. Of everyone yelling past each other. Of headlines instead of conversations. Of people choosing outrage over effort. The room seemed smaller then, as if it wasn't a stage anymore, but a table, kitchen-sized, where two people finally decided to speak from the chest instead of the script. I make jokes for a living, Ellen admitted. But sometimes I hide behind them because, it's easier than saying what really hurts. Kennedy nodded. I hide behind data. Makes me feel safe, but sometimes, it's a wall. A long pause. No one moved. Then Ellen looked directly at the camera. Maybe we're not as different as our audiences think. Maybe they're tired too. Kennedy followed her gaze. Maybe they want truth, even if it's messy. Even if it comes from people they don't like. There, in that moment, they weren't politicians or celebrities. They were Americans. Two imperfect voices on a stage, daring to be real in a world begging for performances. And just for a second, one small, fleeting second, it wasn't about right or left, winning or losing. It was about listening. The studio lights dimmed slightly, but not by design. The control room, almost forgetting its own cues, let the moment breathe. Kennedy glanced at the floor. Then, slowly, he removed his glasses, not as a gesture, but a pause. He placed them carefully on the table, looked up, and locked eyes with Ellen. "I read your book," he said, voice lower than before. "The part about your dad." Ellen didn't blink. "Most people skip that. I didn't." He hesitated, then added, "You fought your way out of a place a lot of people never escape. You turned pain into something public. That's not easy." She was silent. "No thank you." No clever retort. Just a nod, quick, barely noticeable, but enough to say, "I heard you." Kennedy continued, "You know what I realized after 30 years in law? The law can't fix people. But sometimes listening can." Ellen's hand curled around the mug beside her, a nervous tick. Then she pushed it aside and leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes soft but unreadable. "Do you always have a line ready like that?" she asked. "Only when the moment needs one." A long pause. Then, wordlessly, Ellen stood up, not theatrically, not defiantly. Just real. She extended her hand. Kennedy stood too. Took it. There were no cameras zooming in. No crowd cheering. No victory lap. Just a handshake that wasn't about agreement, it was about recognition. As they turned to leave, Ellen muttered, almost off mic, "Guess I'm not the only one who can surprise people." Kennedy didn't smile. But he didn't need to. Sometimes, silence is the loudest proof of change. The hallway outside the studio was narrow, quiet, a stark contrast to the stage they had just shared. Kennedy walked with his usual firm stride, but something in his posture had softened. Ellen trailed just behind, still holding her earpiece, still processing. They reached the exit doors. She stopped. "You know," she said, "I didn't plan to like you even a little." Kennedy turned, eyebrow raised. "And now?" "I still don't," she smirked. "But I respect you. And maybe that's more useful than pretending we'll ever be on the same side." Kennedy nodded slowly. "Respect is a start. Maybe even enough." She crossed her arms. "You think any of this will actually matter to people?" "Depends," he replied. "If they watch with ears instead of fists." They stood in silence, not awkward, not tense. Just present. A car horn outside broke the stillness. Kennedy reached for the door, then paused. "Tell your writers," he said, "that was your best episode." Ellen grinned. "No writers. Just rage. And maybe, curiosity." He pushed the door open and walked into the fading afternoon light. Back inside, Ellen looked at her reflection in the black mirror of the studio monitor. She didn't smile. But she didn't look away. Some conversations don't end in agreement. They end in awareness. Today wasn't about who won. It was about what happened when two worlds collided. One of charm, the other of challenge. Kennedy didn't come to entertain. Ellen didn't back down to accommodate. And somewhere between the silence, a new kind of dialogue was born. The kind that doesn't shout, but stays with you long after the lights go down.